There's a controversy in North Carolina. One of the candidates is deeply corrupt. You're going to find out about it. You'll also be shocked to find out the mainstream media doesn't care because they're like, corruption, that's kind of awesome. But we're going to tell you the reality here. To help us discuss this, Julia Rock joins us from The Lever. She's the one that wrote the stories about this candidate, Ted Budd. So Julia, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. So Richard Burr is retiring in North Carolina. And so this is an open seat. So tell us who's in the race and what the lay of the land is first.
Yeah, so Ted Budd is the Republicans' nominee for the seat, and he has been in Congress as a representative since 2017. And the story of Ted Budd is really that he loves banks. He's running against Sherry Beasley, a former state Supreme Court justice. And sort of the national media coverage of the race has basically been that it's pretty boring because neither candidate has sort of had, the major gaffe that we're seeing in other tight Senate races across the country. But from our standpoint, this is not a boring election.
Yeah, no, it's not at all. So I understand that Ted Budd has taken some campaign cash and in a shocking turn of events might have done something for his donors. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's done more than one thing for his donors in the banking industry, but you're right, he's being backed by Club for Growth, which is a pro-Wall Street super PAC. He's the first congressional candidate to ever have ads from the American Bankers Association on TV for him. And one might suspect that the reason for this is that he's really gone to bat for major issues that the banks have, specifically with Dodd era regulations. So first, he championed a bank merger, the biggest one since the financial crisis between BB&T and SunTrust to create Truist Bank. He also picked a really unpopular battle, not only for Congress, but even within his own party, going to bat for banks to allow them to charge higher fees to retailers when you swipe debit cards. And he also had a pretty unusual campaign also on behalf of banks to help lenders, consumer lenders and fintech lenders bypass state interest rate laws by functionally choosing which bank they use to originate the loan.
So I love when different bribes get into a bribe war, even within the Republican Party. Like the retailers are bribing different Republicans and the banks are bribing Budd. And so then they fight over each other because the retailers don't want to pay the banking fees and the banking fee guys say, oh yeah, we're gonna pay even more to the even more corrupt guys. So this is what our democracy has devolved to. But in the case of Ted Budd, so let's talk about numbers. So what's the rough sense of about how much these folks, Club for Growth, et cetera, are pouring into his campaign?
I mean, what's funny is that Club for Growth actually spent a massive amount of money, not only in the general election now, but in the primary. But they've spent almost $10 million on ads boosting his campaign, and Club for Growth has bundled like nearly 300,000 in individual donations. I think it's 258,000. And Budd has also received, nearly 400,000 from individuals in the lending and financial services industry. So these are huge sums of money. Senate Majority PAC is the biggest outside group spending for him, and Club for Growth is next.
Okay, and so what did the folks get in return? Well, what did Budd do to protect these donors?
Well, so on the point you mentioned about the retailers versus the banks, it was sort of funny because Republicans basically had to choose which lobbying group to go with, although the status quo favored the retailers. But what he was fighting for on behalf of the banks was about 10 billion in lost revenue that they said they had lost after Dodd-Frank passed, when there was a cap put on these swipe fees. So that was a huge amount of money for them. And this other issue of banks originating loans on behalf of consumer and fintech lenders, it's a little bit hard to know, exactly like what the size of the gain for banks would have been there, because not all of this activity is recorded. Financial regulators are still trying to figure out what's going on with it. But this is a huge business, because if a consumer, consumer loans in many states, including North Carolina, are capped at a 36% interest rate. And with this scheme where banks are originating the loans on behalf of the consumer lenders, you see interest rates on the scale of like 300 to 400%. So again, it's just a massive amount of money, that his donors stand to gain for the policies he's pushing.
And how does he push them?
Well, that's a great question, because he came to Congress in the majority, and the Republicans had this big bill to basically unwind the parts of Dodd-Frank that they hated the most. And he, played a role in really making sure banks got what they wanted from that. And then once he was in the minority, he was pressuring regulators, to issue rules that the bank industry groups were asking for, and also to approve this merger between two banks that again was the biggest merger in the wake of the financial crisis.
So Julia, that's the part I never understood. I'm being honest, because a lot of times I ask questions sarcastically, but this one's real in terms of, so like people in Congress or the Senate will write letters to regulators, and I always think like, why are they even allowed to do that? What do they have? I mean, they're almost by definition meddling on behalf of their donors, right? And what does it mean to write a letter? Why do the regulators get pressured by that? Is it legal, illegal? Help me understand that.
It's a great question, because I think these letters to regulators just sort of smell of corruption in a way even the other stuff doesn't, because one, as former lawmakers told me, as current lawmakers will say, they're basically written by industry groups. And in fact, you don't even have to be told that to know it. They mirror very closely demands of like the Bank Policy Institute, the American Bankers Association. And in the case of Ted Budd, like donations to him will skyrocket around the time when he writes a letter asking for something that banks want. Yes, they're allowed to do it. It's legal. We get them through public records requests. Sometimes lawmakers will sort of brag about them, through press releases and on their website. But oftentimes the public doesn't even know about them, unless they're requested. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's up to the regulators to issue rules, and the banks are pressuring to do something. And maybe a couple of good government groups are pressuring them to do something else. But yeah, why are lawmakers weighing in on these federal regulatory matters? It's usually, it seems, when their donors ask them to.
Yeah, the corruption's so over the top that it's like other than great outlets like The Lever and Intercept and a couple others, so we do it at TY2 too. Nobody even notes it. Like Mo Brooks gave this giant speech about, oh yeah, you buy chairmanships in Congress, right? And you buy in the industry that's affected. If you're going to the banking committee, the bankers give you the $1 million and then you have to do what they tell you, right? And in this case, Bud's like, oh, I wrote a letter on behalf of my donors to unduly influence these folks, and everybody's like, oh yeah, bravo, nicely done. What? Okay, so but now I always want to know from the regulator side too. Like I get it in the good old days / the bad old days, you write a letter to a regulator and you're a powerful person in Congress, that means, son, you better do this, otherwise you're gonna get fired, okay? So that's the old days. So these days, if you're a regulator, why don't you go, oh, duly noted, here, circular filing cabinet, right? What's the implicit threat that I'm missing?
I mean, it's a good question, and of course, like has a lot to do with the switching of power between parties and who's in the executive branch. This should be particularly worrisome because one, if Republicans take the Senate and he's elected, he's going to be launched into an even more powerful position, probably on the Senate Financial Services Committee. And two, the plan that Republicans have been outlining in an ongoing way, as both parties do for when they take office, is to be really aggressive about their use of congressional oversight of the executive branch. So this is something that really has, a lot of teeth behind it, and that we should be more concerned about if Republicans take Congress and have control of these committees, and their threats are even more meaningful.
So you're writing about the substance of it, but out of curiosity, do you know how he's doing?
How the race is going. I mean, the polling has been very close. Initially it was sort of seen as it would be a Republican seat, and then Beasley started polling really well, and now Democrats are pouring a lot more money into the race. It's sort of I would never make a prediction about this type of thing, but it seems like a very close race.
Got you. And then Beasley, is she pointing out this reporting or this issue on the campaign trail at all?
It really hasn't come up at all, and one thing that's interesting is the Club for Growth ads attacking her. Again, this is basically a Wall Street super PAC, and they're mostly attacking her for some, small and old cases she ruled on as a justice. I mean, the debates in this election have not at all been about financial issues, even though, on the predatory lending point, if Bud had gotten his way on all of these regulations, groups were warning it would cost people just in North Carolina $500 million. It's huge sums of money that would have real impact on people, not just around the country, but in North Carolina. And there just hasn't been really discussion about this either in the ads for the race or in the debates between the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could make, if I was running ESM, I'd tell folks, this guy ripped you off for $500 million. And he's getting, his ads are run by the bankers, literally, the American Banking Association and et cetera. But my guess is, I don't know a thing about Beasley, but Beasley and the Democrats, they never bring that stuff up because they have banker donors. So
Yeah, that's exactly the point. And in some cases, it's Biden regulators now who are not turning back on the positions that Trump regulators adopted when under pressure from lawmakers from Bud. And the Democrats are probably better on these banking regulation issues, but you're right, it's a problem in both parties.
All right, last thing. I'm sure that his excuse is, oh, no, I'm doing this to create jobs in North Carolina. How's that worked out?
There have been massive layoffs, thousands of layoffs actually, just in North Carolina because of this bank merger that he championed.
Oops. Okay, there goes his only excuse. Julia Rock, really great reporting at The Lever. Thank you for joining us, appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.